The amber glow of string lights cast warm shadows across the sprawling garden of Keanu Reeves' Hollywood Hills home. What had started as a small gathering to celebrate the wrap of his latest film had organically grown into something larger. Friends bringing friends, colleagues introducing industry contacts, and somehow, inevitably, a few people he'd never met, but who seemed to know everyone else. Keanu stood near the outdoor kitchen, a simple black t-shirt and jeans making him nearly indistinguishable from the catering staff, watching the evening unfold with quiet satisfaction. This was how he preferred his celebrations, unpretentious, genuine, filled with laughter rather than pretense. The sound of conversations mixing with acoustic guitar from a corner where some musicians had gathered created exactly the atmosphere he'd hoped for. "Mr. Reeves?" A gentle voice drew his attention. Maria Santos, his housekeeper of 7 years, approached with a concerned expression. She carried herself with the quiet dignity that had first impressed him when his assistant had recommended her, a single mother working 2 jobs to put her daughter through college, yet never once complaining or asking for anything beyond fair treatment. "Maria, please. Just Keanu," he said, as he had countless times before. Even after all these years, she maintained a formal politeness that spoke to her professionalism, though he'd long considered her more family than employee. "There are more people than we planned for," she said, gesturing toward the house. "Should I call the caterer about additional food?" "Don't worry about it," Keanu replied, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "There's plenty. And if not, I'll order pizza. Remember what I always say. The best parties are the ones where people feel at home." Maria finished with a small smile. It was something he'd told her during her first week when she'd been nervous about a small dinner party he was hosting. "Exactly. You've got this handled, as always." He paused, noticing the slight tension in her shoulders. "Everything okay?" Maria hesitated for just a moment. "It's nothing. Some of the guests are particular about their service. I can handle it." Before Keanu could ask what she meant, a voice boomed across the patio. "Excuse me. Excuse me." The voice carried the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to immediate attention. They turned to see a man in his 50s striding toward them, every inch of his appearance calculated to broadcast wealth and status. His Italian suit probably cost more than most people made in a month. His Rolex caught the light with each gesticulation, and his perfectly styled silver hair looked like it had been touched up by a professional that very evening. This was Richard Blackstone III, though Keanu had only learned his name when someone mentioned he was the son of a studio executive, the kind of Hollywood royalty who treated access to exclusive events as a birthright rather than a privilege. "You," Blackstone pointed directly at Maria, his tone sharp with annoyance. "I asked for a clean glass 10 minutes ago. Do you people not understand simple English?" Keanu felt his jaw tighten, but Maria stepped forward with practiced composure. "I apologize, sir. Let me get that for you right away." "Don't apologize, fix it," Blackstone snapped. "And while you're at it, this whole setup is inadequate. Where's the premium vodka? The champagne selection is pedestrian at best. What kind of operation are you people running here?" "Sir, this is a private party, not a commercial event," Maria replied politely. "I'm sure we can find something to your liking." Private party?" Blackstone's laugh was harsh and condescending. "Look around, sweetheart. This is Hollywood. There's no such thing as private when you're dealing with real money and real power. Now, I don't know what backwater place you learned to serve, but in civilized society, we have standards." Keanu took a step forward, but Maria caught his eye with a subtle shake of her head. She'd dealt with difficult people before. Her dignity in the face of rudeness was something he'd always admired about her. "I understand your concerns," Maria said, maintaining her professional tone despite the obvious disrespect. "Let me personally ensure you have everything you need." "Oh, you'll personally ensure?" Blackstone's voice dripped with mockery. "How generous of you. Tell me, do you even know who I am? Do you have any idea the kind of events I'm accustomed to, the level of service I expect?" A small crowd was beginning to gather, drawn by the commotion. Keanu recognized the expression on their faces, the uncomfortable mixture of fascination and embarrassment that came with witnessing someone behave badly in public. "I'm sorry, but I don't know who you are." Maria replied honestly. I'm here to help make sure everyone has a good time. If you'd like to tell me specifically what would make your evening better, I'm happy to help. Blackstone's face reddened. You don't know who I am. That's rich, absolutely rich. Let me educate you, sweetheart. My family has been in this town since before you were born. We've financed films that made more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. When I walk into a room, people notice. When I speak, people listen. And when I want something, it gets done, immediately and without question. I understand, Maria said quietly. What would you like me to get for you? What I'd like, Blackstone said, stepping closer and lowering his voice to what he probably thought was a menacing whisper, but was still audible to everyone nearby, is for you to understand your place. You're the help. You're here to serve people like me, not to ask questions or make conversation. You nod, you smile, you fetch what's requested, and you stay invisible. Can your little brain handle that concept? The garden had gone noticeably quieter. Even the musicians had stopped playing, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Keanu felt every muscle in his body tense, but Maria maintained her composure with remarkable grace. Yes, sir, she said simply. What can I get for you? Blackstone smirked, clearly enjoying what he perceived as his victory. Finally, I want a vodka martini, Grey Goose, extra dry, 3 olives. And I want it in a properly chilled glass, not whatever recycled junk you've been using. And I want it in 2 minutes, not 10. Think you can manage that without screwing it up? Of course, Maria replied, turning toward the outdoor bar. Oh, and one more thing, Blackstone called after her, his voice carrying across the now silent patio. Next time you work an event with actual important people, try to dress the part. This isn't some suburban barbecue. Have some pride in your appearance. Maria froze. Her simple black dress and comfortable shoes were perfectly appropriate for her role, chosen for practicality and professionalism. But Keanu saw something flicker across her face, a momentary crack in her composure that spoke to deeper hurt. That was the moment Keanu Reeves decided he'd heard enough. He walked slowly toward Blackstone, his movements so fluid and purposeful that conversations stopped and heads turned. There was something in his bearing, not aggressive but absolutely unmistakable in its intent, that commanded attention. Richard, Keanu said quietly, using the man's first name with deliberate informality. Blackstone turned, and for the first time that evening, his arrogant expression faltered slightly. Oh, Keanu, great party. I was just getting some proper service organized. I heard, Keanu interrupted, his voice still quiet but carrying clearly in the hushed garden. I heard every word. Something in Keanu's tone made Blackstone take a small step backward. Look, I wasn't trying to cause a scene. I just believe in maintaining standards. Standards, Keanu repeated, as if testing the word. That's interesting, because I have standards too. Would you like to hear them? Blackstone looked around, suddenly aware that every eye in the garden was focused on their interaction. I'm not sure what you mean. My standards are simple, Keanu continued, moving closer. I believe in treating every person with dignity and respect, regardless of their job, their background, or how much money they have. I believe that kindness is more important than status, and I believe that how we treat the people who serve us, whether they're waiters, housekeepers, parking attendants, or anyone else, says everything about who we really are. The garden was so quiet now that the distant sound of traffic from the valley below seemed loud. Maria had stopped walking toward the bar and turned back, her eyes wide. Now, Keanu said, his voice taking on a steelier edge, let me tell you about Maria. She's worked for me for 7 years. She's put her daughter through college while working 2 jobs. She's never missed a day, never complained, never been anything but professional and kind. She's helped me through some of the darkest periods of my life, not because it was her job, but because that's who she is, a genuinely good person who cares about others. Blackstone opened his mouth to speak, but Keanu held up a hand. She speaks 3 languages fluently, runs a household with more efficiency than most Fortune 500 companies, and somehow manages to make everyone around her feel welcome and valued. She's raised a daughter who's now a pediatric nurse, specifically because Maria taught her the importance of helping others. And you, Keanu looked directly at Blackstone, you just spoke to her like she was less than human. Now wait just a minute. Blackstone started, his face flushing red. No, Keanu said firmly. You wait. You want to talk about standards? About knowing your place? Let me clarify something for you. This is my home. Maria isn't just my housekeeper. She's family. And you just disrespected my family in my house. The silence stretched so long that someone's nervous cough sounded like a gunshot. Blackstone looked around desperately, perhaps hoping for support, but found only faces reflecting various degrees of embarrassment and disapproval. Furthermore, Keanu continued, you seem to be under the impression that money and family connections make you important. But let me share something I've learned in my 50-plus years on this planet. Importance isn't measured in dollars or pedigree. It's measured in how you treat people when you think nobody important is watching. He gestured around the garden. Everyone here just watched you humiliate a hard-working woman for the crime of being polite to you. Everyone here just saw you try to diminish someone whose character and integrity surpass your own by any reasonable measure. And everyone here now knows exactly what kind of person you really are. Blackstone's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You can't speak to me like this. Do you know who my father is? Do you know what this could mean for your career? Keanu's smile was cold. Actually, I do know who your father is. James Blackstone, a man who built his reputation on treating people fairly and recognizing talent regardless of their background. A man who started as a mailroom clerk and worked his way up through honest effort and integrity. I'm betting he'd be absolutely mortified by his son's behavior tonight. The color drained from Blackstone's face. You wouldn't dare. Wouldn't dare what? Tell him the truth? Richard, I've known your father for 15 years. We've had dinner at his house. I've met your mother, your sister, your nephew. They're good people. Salt of the earth. Which makes your behavior tonight even more baffling. Keanu paused, letting that sink in before continuing. But here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk over to Maria and you're going to apologize sincerely for your behavior. Then you're going to leave my party. And if I ever hear of you treating service staff or anyone else with this kind of disrespect again, I will personally ensure that story reaches every person in this industry who matters. Am I making myself clear? Blackstone stood frozen, clearly calculating his options and finding none of them appealing. The Hollywood power dynamics he'd relied on his entire life had suddenly shifted, and he was discovering what it felt like to be on the wrong side of them. This is ridiculous, he stammered. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. I was just trying to get proper service. Proper service? Keanu's voice rose for the first time that evening. Richard, Maria was being perfectly polite and accommodating. You were being cruel for no reason other than the fact that you could be. That's not about service. That's about character. And right now, you're showing everyone here that yours is seriously lacking. A woman in the crowd, someone Keanu recognized as a prominent casting director, spoke up. He's right, Richard. That was completely out of line. Absolutely inappropriate, added a man Keanu knew to be a successful producer. There's no excuse for that kind of behavior. More voices joined in, a chorus of disapproval that made Blackstone's face go from red to pale to red again. He looked around desperately, but found no allies in the crowd. This is insane, he muttered. It's like you people have never been to a real party before. I've been to plenty of parties, said a voice from the back of the crowd. An elegant woman in her 70s stepped forward, someone Keanu recognized as a legendary actress whose career spanned 5 decades. I've been to parties with kings and presidents, with Nobel Prize winners and titans of industry, and I can tell you that the mark of a truly sophisticated person isn't how they treat their equals. It's how they treat those who can do nothing for them. She looked directly at Blackstone. Young man, your behavior tonight has been absolutely disgraceful. If I were your mother, I'd be ashamed. The crowd murmured agreement, and Blackstone seemed to shrink before their eyes. For the first time that evening, he appeared to grasp the magnitude of his social miscalculation. Now, Keanu said, his voice returning to its normal quiet tone, are you going to apologize to Maria, or am I going to have to ask you to leave without that courtesy? Blackstone looked at Maria, who had remained silent throughout the entire exchange, her hands clasped in front of her and her expression carefully neutral. Something in her quiet dignity seemed to finally penetrate his consciousness. He started, then stopped. Maria, I apologize. My behavior was inappropriate. You were being professional, and I was out of line. It wasn't the most graceful apology ever offered, but it was clearly sincere. Maria nodded graciously. Thank you, Mr. Blackstone. I accept your apology. Now, Keanu said, I think it would be best if you left. Blackstone nodded mutely, clearly understanding that any protest would only make things worse. He walked toward the house with as much dignity as he could muster, which wasn't much given the circumstances. As his footsteps faded, the tension in the garden began to dissipate. Conversations resumed gradually, though in more subdued tones, and the musicians began playing again. Keanu walked over to Maria, who was still standing frozen by the bar. Are you okay? She nodded, though he could see the emotional toll the confrontation had taken. Thank you, she said quietly. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Keanu replied firmly. Nobody gets to treat you that way. Not in my house, not anywhere, not ever. But his connections, his father, won't this cause problems for you? Keanu shrugged. If it does, then those aren't the kind of people I want to work with anyway. Maria, you've been nothing but kind and professional for 7 years. You've taken care of my home, my guests, and me with more grace than I could have hoped for. If someone can't see your worth, that's their blindness, not your failing. Tears welled up in Maria's eyes. I've dealt with people like that before. Usually, I just ignore it and move on. But tonight, I don't know why it got to me. Because you're human, Keanu said gently, and because no one should have to just deal with being treated like that. You deserve respect not because of what you do for a living, but because you're a person, a good person. The legendary actress approached them, having overheard the conversation. My dear, she said to Maria, I hope you know that man's behavior reflects solely on him, not on you. In all my years in this business, I've learned that true class isn't about breeding or money. It's about how you carry yourself and how you treat others. You displayed more class in 5 minutes than he's likely shown in his entire life. Maria smiled through her tears. Thank you, both of you. As the evening continued, something remarkable happened. Word of the confrontation spread through the party, but rather than creating an uncomfortable atmosphere, it seemed to bring people together. Guests went out of their way to thank Maria for her service, to compliment the beautiful setup, to engage her in genuine conversation rather than treating her as invisible. A young actor approached her while she was arranging some flowers. Excuse me, Maria, I just wanted to say thank you for everything you've done tonight, and I'm sorry you had to deal with that jerk. That's very kind of you, Maria replied. I'm from a small town in Ohio, the actor continued. My mom worked as a housekeeper for a wealthy family to put me through acting classes. She dealt with people like that guy all the time. Seeing Keanu stand up for you, it meant something to me. Similar conversations happened throughout the evening. A director shared stories of his grandmother, who had cleaned offices her entire life. A producer talked about his father, who had been a waiter while pursuing his dreams. Person after person found ways to connect with Maria's experience, to acknowledge her humanity and dignity. Keanu watched these interactions with quiet satisfaction. This was what he'd hoped his party would be, real connections between real people, rather than the superficial networking that dominated so many Hollywood gatherings. Near the end of the evening, as the last guests were saying their goodbyes, the legendary actress pulled Keanu aside. That was beautifully handled, she said. In a town full of people who claim to care about social justice but often ignore the injustices right in front of them, you actually acted on your principles. Your parents would be proud. The mention of his parents, both long gone, hit Keanu in a way he hadn't expected. Thank you, he said simply. That means more than you know. I've been in this business for 50 years, she continued. I've seen careers rise and fall, witnessed countless displays of ego and entitlement, but I've rarely seen someone in your position stand up for someone in Maria's position so directly and so publicly. It was refreshing. After the last guest had left, Keanu found Maria in the kitchen, finishing the cleanup despite his repeated insistence that she leave it for the morning. You know I can hire people to do this, right? He said, leaning against the doorframe. I know, Maria replied, but didn't stop wiping down the counters. I need to keep busy right now. Keanu understood. Sometimes physical activity was the only way to process emotional turmoil. He grabbed a dish towel and started drying the glasses she had washed. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Maria spoke. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you do it? I mean, really. You could have just let it go, avoided the confrontation. That man could make things difficult for you. Keanu considered the question carefully. Do you remember what you told me when your daughter was deciding between colleges? Maria looked puzzled. I told you a lot of things about Isabella's college choice. You said you told her that the measure of an education wasn't just what she learned in the classroom, but whether it taught her to stand up for what's right, especially when it's difficult. Maria nodded slowly. I remember. Well, Keanu said, hanging up the dish towel, I guess you could say tonight was my education, and you taught me that lesson a long time ago. They finished cleaning in comfortable silence, and as Maria gathered her things to leave, Keanu stopped her. Maria, I want you to know something. What happened tonight? It wasn't your fault. You handled yourself with incredible grace under pressure. And if anyone ever treats you that way again, anywhere, I want you to call me immediately, okay? She nodded, tears threatening again. Thank you, Keanu, for everything. Thank you, he replied, for taking such good care of all of us. As Maria's car pulled out of the driveway, Keanu stood in his garden, looking up at the stars barely visible through the Los Angeles haze. The evening hadn't gone as planned, but in many ways, it had gone exactly as it should have. He thought about his parents, about the values they'd instilled in him, kindness, humility, respect for all people, regardless of their station in life. He thought about the roles he'd played, the characters who stood up for the underdog, who fought for justice and dignity. Tonight, life had given him the opportunity to be that character in reality, not just on screen. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Heard about tonight. Richard Blackstone Jr. called the office. Wants to discuss the misunderstanding. Should I take a meeting? Keanu typed back, no need. He apologized to Maria. That's all that matters. Another text came in, this one from the legendary actress. My dear, I've told half of Hollywood about tonight already. Your stock has risen considerably. More importantly, you did the right thing. He smiled and put the phone away. The stock market of Hollywood opinion had never interested him much. But knowing that he'd stood up for someone who mattered to him, someone who deserved to be treated with dignity, that was worth more than any role or accolade. The next morning, Keanu woke to find a handwritten note slipped under his front door. Maria's elegant script read, Dear Keanu, I've been thinking about what you said, about measuring ourselves by how we treat others. You've always treated me like family, but last night you showed me what that really means. Isabella called this morning. She heard about what happened. News travels fast in this town, and she wanted me to tell you something. Her patients at the children's hospital are going to love the story about how their nurse's mom works for John Wick, and how John Wick stood up for her when someone was mean. Thank you for giving her another reason to be proud of her mother, and for teaching all of us what true strength looks like. With all my gratitude, Maria. Keanu folded the note carefully and put it in his wallet, next to a photo of his parents. Some moments in life crystallized everything you believed about what mattered, about who you wanted to be. Last night had been one of those moments. He made his coffee and sat in his garden, where the evidence of the previous evening's party had been so thoroughly cleaned away that it might have been a dream. But the sense of rightness, of having acted in accordance with his deepest values, was very real. In a few hours, he'd go to work, stepping back into the world of cameras and scripts and make-believe. But for now, he sat quietly in the morning light, grateful for the reminder that the most important role anyone could play was simply being human, kind, decent, and willing to stand up for what's right, especially when no one expected it. The story would spread through Hollywood, as such stories do. It would be embellished and altered with each telling, but the core truth would remain. In a town built on image and illusion, sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply be authentically, genuinely good. And in a modest house across town, a housekeeper named Maria would wake up knowing that her dignity had been defended, her worth acknowledged, and her years of quiet service honored by someone who understood that true importance wasn't measured in box office receipts or industry connections, but in the simple act of treating every person as if they mattered, because they did.